Welcome, everybody, on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I am an educator at the museum. This afternoon, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Phil Raucher, a Holocaust survivor, or an eyewitness to the Holocaust, who will be sharing his personal story with you. Before we begin, I would like to share a few quick words about the museum. Our museum was founded in the early 1960s by a group of Holocaust survivors who came to Los Angeles and decided that they wanted to create a space to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations by sharing their stories and their families' stories. In the early 1960s, there were not yet very many people who were willing to face this tragic history, as it had only ended about 15 years earlier. But thanks to their courage and their foresight, we have now the first and oldest Holocaust survivor founded Holocaust Museum in the United States. I'm so honored to welcome Phil Raucher this afternoon, who will be sharing his story with you. Phil has been involved with our museum and our educational programs for several years. He, together with his wife, Virginia, have been so active in person and for the last year and a half on Zoom, speaking to students and all sorts of groups on a regular basis and sharing this history. Phil, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Those watching on Zoom after his talk can use the Q&A box to ask questions, and those watching on Facebook can use the comments section, and we'll get to as many questions as time permits. Thank you again so much for joining us today, everybody. And Phil, thank you so much, and you may begin.
I'm Philip Raucher, also known as Phil, and I'm almost 95 years old. I was invited to tell you how I survived in an era where I was sentenced to die per the German Nuremberg laws, which specifies that all Jews have to be eliminated. The killing method was either outright or by working one to death. I was picked to die by working me to death, but I survived because the Germans lost the war. Now, at the outset, I wanted to tell you that before I start my story, that I do not like the word extermination if it is applied to kill humans. To me, extermination applies to roaches, ants, etc. In other words, my parents were not exterminated, they were murdered. I was liberated from a concentration camp in 1945, which I'll explain later, and did not talk to strangers or even my children about it because I was ashamed or I had nightmares, but felt that life must go on. I'm not saying to forget the past, because the past is the best teacher and advisor, not to repeat something that was proven to be bad. The past, I look to the future and be willing to struggle to accomplish success. Now, the reason I agreed to tell what happened to me is because I read Elie Wiesel's book, and he explains how each person had a different experience, but he insisted that he is not a survivor, but rather he calls himself a witness. And I agree with his observations that telling my experience as a witness to the people in 2017. Now I'll tell you about my experiences from before the war and after the war. And I have some pictures. You're welcome to see them. I lived in a plot of land that was very rich in coal. The area was approximately 700 square miles, and it was divided in half by a river. The river was called Brinica. West of the river, before World War I, it belonged to Germany. They called it Oberschlesien. The Poles called it Śląsk. The east side of the river belonged to Poland, and they call it Zagłębie. However, after World War I, the League of Nations made Śląsk as part of Poland. They forbid, when Poland moved in, they forbid the people to speak German, changed the money to Polish zlotys, and so on. I was born in Czeladz, Poland, in Zagłębie in 2127. It was a small city, approximately 10,000 inhabitants, including 1,000 Jews. The biggest city in the area was called Katowice. I had a younger brother, which was 3 years younger than me, and an older sister was 3 years older than me. My father was 3 years older than my mother. We had carnivals come to town every year with merry-go-rounds and circus and other entertainment. We had one movie house, and the first film I saw was a comedy with Laurel and Hardy. And I don't remember the name of the second movie, but it had to do with a small boy living in a jungle with an elephant. We lived in a 2-story apartment building. We had 2 bedrooms upstairs and a kitchen and a living room downstairs. We had one coast iron coal-operated heater, and for the night, they closed the vents, and the coal would glow all night. It was more than enough to heat the upstairs and downstairs. I was going to a Polish public school and belonged to the Polish Boy Scouts. And after dinner, I went to a Jewish cheder, which is a Jewish school, to study Bible and Hebrew. I had Jewish and non-Jewish friends, and on Christmas, I was always invited for Christmas dinner. I played sports like soccer and rode a big man's bike because there were no kids' bike available at that time. And the reason I'm pointing out big man bike is because I could not reach the pedals and had to reach under the upper frame of the bike to pedal. And the bike had be tilted in a 45-degree angle to balance. I also played other sports. We always went to synagogue on Jewish holidays, and sometimes on Friday before dinner. We often invited a yeshiva student, which is a rabbinical student, for dinner. And he would lead us in singing zmirs. It's called singing between meals or between courses. And everyone participated, and we always had a real good time. We had 2 businesses, one in Czeladz, where we rented horses and wagons to peddlers who were repairing roofs. The other was a hardware store in Roženkau, about 15 kilometers from Czeladz, and it was in Slonsk. All of a sudden, in 1938, everything changed. This was 1 year before the Second World War started. I was 11 years old when the public schools introduced the Christian's religion as a subject, and the Jewish students could not participate and had to leave the room. Can you take that up? They broke the window. At the same time, the Polish anti-Semite put up signs not to buy in Jewish stores and broke the windows. They copied what the Germans did in Germany. The Germans gave it a name and they called it Kristallnacht. The translation for this word is crystal night, because smashed glass looks like crystal. And when I asked why my friends did that, the answer always was that the Jews rob the Poles of their jobs, their money, and killed Jesus. These had been my old good friends. How somebody could change and hate me so much, I could not understand. Being so close to the German border, the Jews were kicked out of Germany, came to our city. The Jews in our city organized a soup kitchen and also put families up in their home. They chose the family with the biggest living room so that all children could be together. We felt so bad because we could not communicate with them. At the same time, anti-Semitism was getting worse. In schools, the students were attacking us with sticks and baseball bats, and the parents hired a man to protect us, but it did not work out. So my parents took us out from public school and enrolled us in a private school in the next city called Benjamin. We had to travel to school by streetcar. By the way, Zagłębie had streetcars connecting 4 cities, Sosnowiec, Dąbrowa, Benjamin, and Czeladz. Because Czeladz had no high school, the high school students had to travel to Benjamin. And they also started fighting with us. And we, because they were older, we had no chance to protect us. The school tried to accommodate us and arranged different school hours, but it did not work out because I missed 70% of the instructions. For the record, I started in 4th grade in Benjamin, but because I missed so much that in reality, I finished 3rd grade only. In the meantime, Hitler announced that he wanted Oberschlesien back, and obviously the Poles said no, and instead they started fortifying the border, which included Czeladz. They brought in horse-drawn cannons and many soldiers. It created a lot of fear and anxiety because people did not know what to do. At the same time, our customers who bought on credit in our Roženkau store stopped paying the bills. We were running out of money. So my father decided that he and I take different areas to visit the people to encourage them to pay. He gave me a horse and wagon and a driver and said, good luck. Things were getting worse because of the war scare. We had a grandfather who lived in the city called Wolbrom, which was approximately 45 miles from Czeladz. To be on the safe side, in case there is a war, my parents decided to take me and my younger brother to my grandparents. I was 12 years old and my brother was 9. My sister, who was 15, and my parents would remain home to protect our belongings and feed the horses. When we got to my grandfather's house, it was full of other relatives who were in the same predicament. And after they arrived in Wolbrom, the war started. It was September 139. 2 days later, the Germans marched into Wolbrom. They burned down the synagogue, picked up 25 young Jews and beat them so badly that they broke their legs, ribs. As this was going on, we were on our own. That means me and my brother. So we tried to leave home, and we told our aunt what we want to do, and she tried to stop us, but we insisted we have to go home. So she gave us some money and a loaf of bread, and we went to the railroad station and had to wait for 3 days for a train to go west, because all trains were going east because of the war. There was no train schedule, and it was cold and rainy, and we had to sleep outside. When we finally got home, my father was gone because we had horses. The police drafted him and forced him to drive them away from the Germans, and he wound up in the Russian Poland. It took the Germans 1 day to march into Czeladz, and they did the same thing as in Wolbrom. They burned the synagogues, rounded up Jewish people to beat them up, and in addition, they closed all Jewish schools. We had to turn in any kind of radio that we had, and they posted a curfew and limited where we could walk, and ordered to wear white armbands with a blue star on it. They also replaced the Polish police with the German police because they annexed the area. I was able to get a job at the German police station, polishing their shoes and cleaning their station. For this, I was paid with their leftover food and was allowed to take the leftover food home. My sister got a job registering Jews only to receive ration cards. Now we know why only Jews had to register. It was done to prepare a current list of where the Jews lived so they could easily be found. The Germans annexed Zagrebia and sent in the SA, also known as the brown shirts, who later were replaced by the SS. They came in and plundered our town and plundered the Jewish homes and took whatever they wanted. They also started picking up people we did not know what they did with them. So we started to finding hiding places. I remember once my mother hid a little bag of flour in the dirty clothes cupboard, but they found it and took it away from us. We were very scared, but they did nothing to us. Next, they started to come out with orders almost every day. We were not allowed to live on or cross any main street, and we had to move to a smaller side street. The penalty for crossing a main street was to be arrested and disappear forever. We had to move to the only place we could find was one room in one-story building that could accommodate a single bed, two single beds, a table, and some chairs. We had to sleep three in a bed. The advantage of that we had a window that faced a rye field and was good for us because the farmers threshed the rye stem from the inedible hull and left the hull in the field and made a big pile of it. Because the hull was very sticky, it would stick to your clothes and skin. It made the skin itch a lot. Therefore, no one wanted to get close to it. And that was a plus for us because we could hide there. Next, they started rounding up Jews to build a highway without pay and mistreated them badly. They also established a Jewish police force to help them with the roundups. At the same time, they started picking up older and sick people and were unable to work. To avoid being picked up, we had to hide. Finally, my father came home and got a job stacking potatoes in a warehouse. About the same time, I lost my job because the police moved to a street I was not allowed to walk on. So I got a job where my father worked, also stacking potato sacks, but the work was very hard for me because even with a partner, I had to lift up 50 kilo bags, which is equal to 110 pounds each. About the same time, the Germans came up with new orders that said that if in a family of 5, only 2 could stay home and 3 had to work. People who could not make the quota were picked up and taken away. And we did not hear from them, from the older or the young people. I was almost 13 years old, and my family wanted me to have a bar mitzvah. It hired an older rabbi to teach me, and we paid him with potatoes. And his wife was ecstatic because they had no other income. However, it lasted for 2 sessions only because he and his wife were picked up and taken away. One time, 2 butchers who caught having some meat, and as a penalty, all Jews had to get together in the city square and witness their hanging. Next, we had to move to a ghetto. It was a part of the city called Czeladz, and they made us wear yellow stars sewed to the outside of the garment. We created hiding places in the attic of a 2-story building. The access door to the attic was located over a staircase, and to get to access door, we had to use a ladder. Then again, the law changed where a family of 5, only one could stay home, and 4 people had to work. and work for a company that was German owned. Because of that, I had to change jobs and found a job at a Germany owned furniture factory. I had to get up 4 a.m. because I had to work in the fields in the dark to get to the factory. I had to be at work 5:30 a.m. One of my jobs was to start the fire to melt the glue for the cabinet makers because they seldom use nails. I also had to carry wooden boards to the shop for fabrication. I worked this job for about 5 months. But next, there came a ruling again that the stars had to be sewed in inside the jacket and the pants, which meant that we had to cut the garment for the star to show up. So that because of that, my father again suggested that we move to Wolbrom because Wolbrom was occupied Poland and we lived in German annexed area, which a strict border dividing the areas. They did not have the usual laws like we had. So again, my parents decided to move to Wolbrom. My brother and I were supposed to go first, but the smuggler advised us that he could take only one person at a time. So it was decided that my brother would go first. And once we heard that he made it, I was to be next. After a few days, I packed my suitcases and was ready to go. As I was ready to leave, a neighbor came with the bad news that the SS came into Wolbrom and picked all Jews, both young and old, who were taken away. After the war, we learned that they were taken to a camp called Belzec. And upon arrival, they were taken to a so-called shower room with diesel motor engines were piped and everyone was suffocated. One day, the SS came and took all of the Jews who worked in this German factory, that included me, to a prison in Czeladz. The next day, they took us to the Dulag in Sosnovitz, where they picked up all the people from the Zagłębie area to be selected either to go to work or sent back, but nobody knew where. My parents reasoned that because I worked for the German company and had a minor sickness, they would let me go. So somehow they arranged with somebody to smuggle in a bottle of soap water and ask me to drink it before they start the selection. So they smuggled in a bottle of soap water and I was supposed to vomit before the selection. But I decided not to drink the water because I felt so bad that no matter where they would send me, I could not be any worse than it is right now. I was 14 old when I was selected to go to work. The next day, they gave us some food and loaded us upon a truck, and we drove approximately 6 hours. We finally stopped at a freight railroad station and immediately made us unload cement bags from the railroad cars and carry them to a warehouse. It was quite a distance, and we had no food or toilet facilities, and it was raining. The SS took over and started hitting and yelling, "Run faster." Because the bags were made out of paper, when they got wet from the rain, they tore apart and the cement spilled on some people, and it stuck to them, and they became like statues made out of concrete. And because of that, because they weren't working so hard, they made the SS got even more vicious and brutal. I worked like this for over 2 hours and got lucky because the warehouse was a big cement mixer, and the mixer operator took a liking to me and asked me to stay in the warehouse to help him. He also told me that the SS would take us to a camp and would determine where I would go to work next. But he told me anyway that I should request that they send me to him. And I did. But the copper got mad and beat me up and yelled, "I'm God, and I only will decide where you go to work." The labor camp was called Markstedt, a small city, and it is located in Germany near Breslau. Now Breslau is called Wrocław. They used the labor camp people to build a cannon factory for the Krupp company. And the Krupp company dedicated it to his daughter and called it the Bertha Worker Factory. It was midnight when we arrived in this camp. They took us to an Appellsplatz assembly ground. The light came on, and the camp leader delivered a speech. After the speech, they marched us through a block that is a barrack that had several rooms and separated the people in groups of 40 per room. The room was about 40 by 30 feet. They picked one person from our group to be in charge of the room with the food distribution. The lunch consisted of 1/5 of a loaf of bread and a piece of margarine. The next day at 5 a.m., they marched us to the assembly grounds to be counted. Then we lined up outside in front of the kitchen and gave us our breakfast. It consisted of a bowl of either potatoes or spinach and a piece of bread. Both were a quarter of what we needed to survive. The spinach was hardly washed. It has more dirt than spinach. My job was to carry 4x8 and 2x6 wood joists from the railroad train to the job site on my bare shoulders. Obviously, the shoulders developed blisters that turned into infections, and many people died from the beatings because they could not put the weight on their infected wounds. However, the SS and coppers beat them until they expired. I was lucky because I learned in the factory, where I worked in the furniture factory, to recognize dry and damp words, because dry wood weighs half or a quarter at the damp work weighs. Therefore, I was less prone to get infections and would walk faster than the rest of the people and was beaten less. After 10 hours of work, we went back to the camp and assembled again in the assembly grounds to be counted. Next, we had to march line up outside the kitchen and giving dinner, regardless of the weather. We wore our own civilian clothes and had to move the yellow Star of David to be sewed in inside the jacket and the pants that wore at home and continued wearing them in the camp without changing clothes for about 1 year. The cleanup consisted of once a week sitting outside the barrack on a long bench and table, and we had to find the lice to kill him. They called it delousing. Then we went to a large bathroom that had faucets, but no sink or soap, and we got only cold water to wash our face and hands. After helping the camp for approximately 3 weeks, once we returned to the camp, they took everyone from my room to a special room. The room leader came in and said that our room leader did not come back to the camp and asked us if we knew what happened to him. Or if we heard him talk about it. Of course, we all said he must have been, we all said no, we did not hear anything about it, and we don't know anything what he did or what he said. And the camp leader, he was in a good mood, I guess. And he said, well, that since we didn't know anything about it, you can go, we'll let you free. However, there was one guy in our group that wanted to make his case better. He said this guy was distributing the bread unfairly. When the camp, then the camp leader said, when you came to this camp, I told everybody that if you see or hear that somebody is planning something, you tell me right away. And because you did not, everybody will get 25 lashes. And it's starting right now. By the way, the lashes were made out of cow tail stuffed with wire. They took us to a specially designed penalty enforcing room and had a table with cutouts where one had to insert both hands and legs to be fastened down. I was too small to fit into this contraption, so I had to lay down on the table, but not fastened down. And they started hitting me. But as they were hitting me, every time they hit me, I jumped because it hurt. And they kept yelling, stay still, and missed the count how many lashes I had received. I was beaten up so much that I could not walk, and I had to be carried back to the room. The rule was that one could stay in the room for 3 to 4 days only. And if you did not get better, they declared you unfit to work and they hauled you away. A few weeks after I was picked up, they also picked up my father and my sister to be sent away to concentration camps. I found out that by chance, they picked up my father, and by chance, they brought my father to the camp I was in. He arrived one day before I was to be declared unfit to work and hauled away. He found me and took me into his room. He knew some people in the room, and they let him do it. My father was selected to work landscaping a portion of the camp, which also had workers from the Czechoslovakia and so on, and they were receiving Red Cross packages. They gave some food to my father, and my father shared it with me, but there were all kinds of problems with bringing the food in to the camp. So we had to use all kinds of methods. The above lasted about 4 months because one day my father died at the job site and was brought into the camp. I don't know why he died, and I don't want to know. The SS gave me 2 options. Either they would dispose of the body or allow me to take him to a designated place outside the camp by myself and bury him. Obviously, I choose the second option. Now I had to find a way to take my dead body that was larger than I was, and also carry a shovel to dig a hole. Approximately 2 weeks after my father died, they moved my block to a new section of the camp, and it had no toilet. For the night, they assigned prisoners to carry the buckets of waste to designated place. The problem was that our barrack was the closest to the fence, and anytime the guard saw something moving, they would shot to kill. In addition to this, many people died of hunger. I was 16 years old when I moved to another camp. The job site was the same, but the distance was longer and required more walking. When I arrived, we found out that it was a concentration camp called Untitled. It was the infamous Gross-Rosen, a branch of Gross-Rosen. There were approximately hundreds of people bringing there. First, when we got there, they cut a strip of hair from our back to the front of approximately 2 inches wide. Next, they took us to a shower. I remember the shower felt so incredibly good because I had been a long time since my last shower, and it helped to clean some of my pus and my blisters. However, it was cold outside, and they made us walk in one door and out the other door directly to the outside. They gave us new clothes consisting of a blue and white striped jacket, pants, a hat, and wooden soled shoes. After they sewed on the pants and on the jacket a 3-inch ID number with a yellow stripe in front of the number. The color designated the nationalities on also the nationalities to identify who was a Jew. My number was 25,414, and I had to reply to that number, and we were treated differently than the other people. The barrack to which I was assigned was number 22. It consisted of 3 rooms. The center room was assigned for the management, and the room on both sides were sleeping quarters for the prisoners that were 3 bunk beds and 1-inch layer of straw, and we had to no blankets and sleep in our clothes. To count, they counted us 3 times a day. Number 1 was the morning, when we got up, and after we made our beds, then the SS would come on and check if we made the beds properly. The straw had to look like a board, but the real reasons were to verify how many people died overnight and were crippled. If the straw was not to their liking, they would also beat you with the rifles to death. Next, we were allowed to go to the toilet, which we built. It was approximately 25 feet long and 15 feet deep and about 5 feet wide. And we had to sit on a log. The problem with this arrangement was that every time it was used, the SS would come in and start yelling, "Dirty Jews," and walk down and push some people into the pit. And they obviously drowned there because it was too deep. And we had urinals and also cold water faucet, and was meant to clean up, but they did not give us any soap or anything to wash with. Number 2, they took us out to exercise. We had to line up in front of the barrack and march to an assembly room ground. The exercise commands were given over a loudspeaker, and it consisted of the following. With the right hand, touch your head, take the head off and hit the leg. With it, the sound of hit had to be in unison. So only one sound was to be heard. And the SS would walk around with the big German shepherds and whipped anyone who was out of sync. And sometimes they used their rifles. After they gave us the food rations of food, which were not enough for anyone to survive, we marched to the dump site. Number 3 was after, that means the counting, was after we came back from work. A few days after we arrived in Fünfteichen, a pimp approached me and told me that the camp leader is looking for young people to have fun with. He was homosexual. I had never heard of something like this before and was very frightened before I had the chance to reply, he said, as a start, you will get a job taking the empty dinner food canisters back to the kitchen. And usually there's some food stuck to the cans, and you can scrape it off and eat it. So I broke off part of a spoon handle so that I could hide it more easily. It lasted about 3 months, and he never talked to me about it. For your information, I was never molested, but I loved this job and the food stopped. At the job site, they started to construct the roof. They brought in large wood girders that were approximately 40 feet long by 5-inch feet tall, about 12 inches thick. And they were very heavy. We had to carry them from the railroad station to the job site. They picked up about 35 people to carry them. They had to lift them up and put them on their shoulders. And this was impossible because their shoulders were very sore and they were hungry and weak. And the coppers stood behind them and whipped them like they were horses. And they finally lifted them up and they started walking. They could not hold them up the girder very long, and the girder would come down, and all the people that did not get out of their way, and they were squashed. I don't know how much the girders weighed, but I knew that there were 4 per railroad car. I was spared all this beating because another guy and I were given a crowbar to move the girders down from the railroad car to the ground. Once the beating was so bad that I had to do something to help. So I jumped off the railroad car and helped to lift the girders. The beating process, I was also hit. I stepped away and the copper asked me why I stepped away. So I told him that to lift the girders was not my job and I was only trying to help. So why he hit me? He apologized and wondered why. I thought to myself, there's still a spark in humanity existing. When the girders were delivered to the job site, they immediately set them on the concrete columns. And we had to distribute the purlins and joists on the roof. It was very dangerous because we had to walk on the 12-inch girders in wooden shoes, and it was sometimes windy. The top of the girder was about 4 stories high, and the floor was littered with discarded pieces of concrete. There were no safety precautions, so people were killed every day. Once the camp leader could not understand why so many people were killed, so he went to the job site to find out. I happened to be walking on a girder, and he immediately called his helpers to arrange for me to get some more food. The food helped. To this day, I see the splashes, the dead bodies that fell off the roof and landed where I happened to be and next to the roof ladder. One day, I woke up and felt very bad, like I had a fever, and I was very dizzy. I felt that this condition, I would definitely fall off the roof. So during the morning inspection, I pretended that I could not move. So they took me to the so-called hospital. At that time, we didn't know that the Russians were getting closer, but the, the Germans did know and started making arrangements to evacuate the camp. They verified that I was able to walk, and I was one of them to take the walk with them because they said I was healthy enough. Then I had to go to another building to pick up some clothes because I were naked in the hospital. When I was carrying my clothes, there were people who were sick but were not picked to leave the camp, and they didn't get any clothes and waited outside the hospital begging and crying for people to help them get some clothes. So I decided not to walk and gave them my clothes. I went back to the hospital because I was in the hospital a few days. I had a chance to look around and to familiarize myself with the layout and see if there's anyone I knew. I also knew that the SS would come in to the hospital to verify that all able people had gone. So I figured the only solution I was to hide was, since I saw an area that was full of dead bodies that they didn't have to take away, I decided to cover myself with the body and waited until after they inspected the area. And I knew that they finished inspecting because I heard someone say, they are not able to go anywhere, let's leave. The hospital was located on one corner of the camp, and I could usually see the SS walking around outside the fence with the German shepherds. After the camp people left, I walked over to the window and noticed that the SS were gone and were replaced with old Germans and little dogs. I noticed that something strange was happening. I found some clothes and put them on and asked for and walked over to the kitchen. I found quite a bit of food there, ate it, what I could, and took what I could to the hospital. And no one was there to bother me. At the same time, several other people were in hiding, came out, and we had to decide what to do. We decided to break the gate and leave. As we break the gate, we noticed that some quite far away, it looked like a group of people were coming closer to the camp, and they turned out to be the Russian soldiers. After they came into the camp, several other people who were in hiding came out and circled, and the Russian soldiers asked if there were bad people here. One person recognized the assistant camp leader, who was also a prisoner, and pointed him out. And the Russian soldier without saying anything, pulled out a gun and shot him dead and took off. After we saw that, it was not safe to be around them. And then I and another person who was in hiding decided to leave the camp. We decided to go home, but had no idea where to go home. We started to walk on the road, and we were walked in the first village where no people were there, but left some clothes and food. And we immediately changed into civilian clothes and took some food and continued on our road. It was just so happened that the road where we were on was 5 kilometers from the merging point of the Russian armies, and we were approximately 10 kilometers between the armies. Therefore, there were no civilians in the area. As we walked down the road, the Russian would arrest us and accuse us of being spies. They decided to kill us the next day. Well, we didn't give them a chance because we ran away. But further down the road, the same thing kept happening. Last time they called us, they put us in the kitchen basement and locked up. The next day, a Russian came to us and asked if we had actually been in a concentration camp. So he told us that they decided to kill us, and he opened the door and suggested we get out of here. I continued the same road, was caught again, but this time they put me on a farm and asked me to take a flock of sheep to graze, and gave me a sheepdog to watch them. Once I went to the next city, which was Opel, to investigate how to take a train to go home because it had a big railroad station, and took my dog with me. As soon as the Russians saw the dog, they offered money for him. So I sold him and went back to the farm by myself. And the next day, the dog showed up on the farm, and I sold him again several times. And I accumulated enough money to buy a railroad ticket to be able to go home. My friend and I separated because he went to a different town and I went to my town. When I got home, I was the first Jew in my town. The one neighbor friend offered me a place to sleep, and it was on the floor in an empty room. I had to beg for food. 4 days later, a friend of my parents came back to town, and he had a lumber yard before the war. He started selling his wood, so we had some money and rented a place to stay together. I hoped that my sister was still alive because she was in a camp and might be sick and needs help. So I went back to Germany to look for her and could not find her because the war was still going on. So I gave up and came back to town. At the same time, they gave me a job in my town to train horses. Next, an old neighbor came to me and suggested I go to live on a friend's farm. Now I know why he did this. He found out that the Poles in the city planned to kill me. I lived a short time and the war ended. since the war ended, I felt I would give another try to find my sister. I went back to Germany, looked for her, and could not find it. Then I came back home to my city, and as came into the city, somebody saw me, and he said that your sister is here, and he pointed out to me where he was, and so I finally met her, and I can't express how emotional it was to see her again. So we decided that we were going to stay together. It was just so happened that she had a boyfriend who happened to be my uncle's brother. So we decided we'd live together. My uncle had a clothing store and in the Dumbrova had survived the war and had some merchandise to sell. So he took the store back and sold, and that's how we had the money. And at the same time, in my city, two people came back, and one had a bakery, and the other one had a hardware store. And one day, when my friends were in the store, some Poles came in and shot them dead. So we decided that this is not a safe place to live. So we left and we went to the Russian section of Germany and found a place to stay there. It was a big house with a stable for the Russian horses. And the officers of the Russian soldiers moved downstairs where we lived. And so to make a living, the Russian soldiers gave us ham, and we smuggled the ham to Poland and received vodka as payment. And the job became very dangerous because we had to fight soldiers who wanted to rob us the vodka and stop doing it. In next city, a Jewish committee formed, and we found out that there was an American zone in Germany where American treated the survivors very well. So we decided to go to the American zone. We had to cross the Carpathian Mountains. So we met a Russian soldier, and because we had some vodka with us, and gave him a bottle of vodka, and he took us over the border to Czechoslovakia. But when we got to Czechoslovakia, everyone told us that the city was full, and we better go to the next biggest city, which is called Bratislava, instead. And we did. When we got to the city, we decided to splurge, and we went to a restaurant. However, when we were seated, they gave us a glass of water. Take it and see what it is. And napkins. And we finally got to the railroad station in Vienna and had to cross a border again. When we got to the border, we went into the bathrooms to hide, and it worked. Next, we had to cross the Austrian-German border, and we attached to ourselves to a group of Germans. We pretended to be Germans, and they let us pass, and we ended up in Munich. Then we went to the Jewish organization, and they helped us find a place to stay. Because of the large influx of Jewish refugees, the Americans built DP camps. However, we decided that we would never, ever go back to a camp. And I, by chance, met a German who asked if I were willing to sell some valuable items for him for a commission. And I agreed. At the same time, the Jewish underground contacted me and inquired if the German could have access to guns. And the answer was yes. So I bought everything he had, and the underground asked me if I was willing to transport it to a prepared, prearranged place at the Austrian-German border. So I did take over from there. I was pleased to do it. At the same time, I decided to start training to become a pilot for the Israeli underground. However, after a short time, they checked my health condition and discovered that I was colorblind and had to give up this idea. As time went on, my brother-in-law opened a warehouse selling nylon stockings in a store, and I helped them in the business. Then I heard that they started accepting applications to come to the USA because I was under 18 old and was considered an orphan. And I did not fall under the quota system. I had to find a guarantor who would be responsible for me. So I didn't know anyone in the USA, and I went to the Jewish organization and they found someone to help me. Next, I had to go to a US consulate. They sent me to an MD to check my health, and I was informed that I had spots on my lungs. And because of that, I was rejected and was told to come back in 1 year to recheck. I did, and I was allowed to come to the United States. I came over on a ship, a Navy ship called Bletchford. About 2 days before arriving in New York City, the ship deck broke in half, and the Navy started welding up immediately and asked to help in case if the ship had to be evacuated. Little by little, they managed to pull us into New York Harbor. The organization helped me find a hotel in New York. It's called St. Francis. Because I lived in Munich and the population was about 400,000, I asked if there's a city in the United States about 400,000 because New York was too big for me. And so somebody suggested I move to Akron. So I went to Akron and discovered that Akron felt like a big village. So I asked some people what they do for entertainment, and they told me they go to Cleveland. So I went to Cleveland and I liked it. So I moved and got a job. After a while, I noticed my 4 grades of education in Poland were not enough. Moreover, in Cleveland, they had a system where to learn English, one had to start with primary night school. I was given credit for the classes that I had already taken in Poland and started in 5th grade in advanced middle school. In the last year of middle school, I enrolled in the Cleveland Engineering Institute, and was approximately after 3 years, I started sneezing uncontrollably in the fall. And toward the end of the season, I went to the MD, and he told me that it sounds like I have hay fever, and said, if it comes back next year, then I have it. I listened on the weather prediction announcing that pollen counts, and it was not encouraging. They suggested buying the magazine that shows the pollen counts all over the country, and I did, and listed Los Angeles as having a very low pollen count. And I decided to go to Los Angeles. I immediately loaded my car with my belongings and took off. I drove on the roads for 10 days, including Highway 66, and arrived in Los Angeles. I stayed in a motel for a while until I found a drafting job. In addition, I continued my night school and graduated from the middle school and high school from Fairfax. At the start, and started mechanical engineering at UCLA Night School, and received an engineering certificate and joined the American Engineering Institute. I joined a singles group, but no one would dance with me because I didn't know how to dance. So I went to a night school and learned how to dance and returned to the group. All girls wanted to dance with me. I picked one of the girls I took a liking to. We hit it off. After about 2 years of dating, we decided to get married. We have 2 healthy and successful children and 2 granddaughters in college. We see them often and emphasize to them that giver-uppers never succeed, and everyone must carry a big stick, and because that's what President Theodore Roosevelt said, be nice, but carry a big stick. However, I would add to this quote, and be nice and fair to everyone. And that's the end of my story.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon. If anybody has questions, we do have time for a couple. So those watching on Zoom can use the Q&A box, and those watching on Facebook can use the comments section. And just while we are waiting for any questions, I do have some photographs I wanted to share. We do have a question. What happened to your sister?
Well, she married, and they couldn't come to the United States, and they didn't want to stay in Germany anymore, and they went to Brazil. But we kept seeing each other because she would come to Los Angeles and I would come to Rio de Janeiro quite often, several times a year.
Was it difficult to adjust to living in the United States?
Well, not too bad. I mean, everything was better than what I was used to in Germany. So you get used to good things. It's hard to get used to bad things.
Did you go back to Poland or Germany after you had moved to the United States?
I did go back once, both Germany and Poland. And there was no Jews in my city. And they didn't care much about me. So I just went back to see where we lived and I took some pictures of it, but because all the furniture, everything was still there. So we just looked at it because I went with my wife, and we only allowed one day because I was told, be careful, they might hurt you. So we just looked around to see what was like it and left.
Thank you. Do you have any injuries still from, you mentioned you were beaten a few times. Do you have any scars or any long-lasting injuries from those incidents?
Well, I have one scar over here on my arm, yes.
Thank you. How many languages do you speak now?
Well, I speak a little bit English, German, Polish, and Jewish.
Thank you for sharing. What was your job in the United States?
What was my job?
Yes.
Well, when I arrived in Cleveland, I worked for a factory that was manufacturing key copying machines to assemble them, machine them, and assemble them. And I did it until I discovered I had this hay fever and came to Los Angeles. But at the same time, when I was working in Cleveland, I said to myself, I had to figure out a better way to make a living. So I started out with learning how to draft, because that was way, way before the computer's times. And everything, if you wanted to build a house, a park, or whatever, you had to prepare a drawing. So I learned how to draft, and I went to the Cleveland Engineering Institute to learn how to draft. And so when I came to Los Angeles, I looked for a job as a draftsman and continued schooling until I finished UCLA and worked as a sales engineer. I was engineering the jobs and selling them until I retired.
Thank you. Were you ever in Benjamin?
Yes, I was going to school in Benjamin for a few months.
And when was this?
Well, before the war, when I was taken out of public school, they put me into a private school in Benjamin. And I was going to a private school in Benjamin, but it didn't last very long because the war started.
I wanted to share some of Phil's photographs.
That was my grandfather.
And he left Europe before the war, is that right?
Yes. And here that was my helping out at our home to help my mother. And there were two cousins of my father. One on the right was called Deborah or Dvora, and then the one on the left was called Golda. And at the bottom, I'm on the right-hand side, and my brother is in the middle, and my sister is on the left-hand side. And this is the family that was before my brother was born. That's my father and my father's cousin that helped with the children, and my mother, and my sister and me. And that's me when I belonged to the Boy Scouts in Poland. And that was when I had to have an ID in Germany before the war for my ID, the German ID. And that was kind of about the same time here I work in the furniture factory, and me standing there holding the piece of board where the guy cuts the board. And to see my face, you have to go back to my previous picture. That's because right after that picture was taken, I was taken away to the camp. And I got this picture after the war because it was with my parents at our home. And the people that moved in put all the pictures and everything in the basement. And that's where I found it, in the basement. And this picture was taken by the owner, the German, because he was in the SS, the son, and came down on a furlough and took pictures of what his father now owns. And I was one of them.
Thank you for sharing. Do you know if all Jews in Czeladz were sent to Benjamin?
Well, only people after they picked up my father, my sister, me, and only the people that remained in the ghetto and the people that could work were taken away. So the ghetto got so small that they moved all people to Benjamin ghetto. And from the Benjamin ghetto, they took them to Auschwitz. And they didn't, I don't think, even go to a barrack or something. Right from the railroad track, they put them in the oven.
Thank you for sharing. We are just about at the end of our time slot, but I know that your wife Virginia was with you. I don't know if she's still there, but we'd love to have you. Oh, she's not. Okay. Well, we just wanted to.
You want to talk to her? She's in the other room.
Yeah, if you'd like to introduce her, we would love to say hi.
Hold on.
Thank you. While Phil is getting his wife, I'm just want to share again with our audience that Phil and Virginia have both been so active in our educational programs over the years, and we're so grateful to have them in our community. Hi, so nice to see you. Phil, would you like to introduce Virginia to us?
This is my wife, Virginia Raucher. We usually call her Gina instead of Virginia.
Hello, everybody.
And she was named after the state of Virginia.
That's because that's where my parents lived in Virginia. We used to go to Virginia Beach after I was older and so forth and so on. So it was named after a city, a state.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for everything that you contribute on a regular basis to not only to our museum, but to our community and to our future generations by sharing Phil's story. It's great to see both of you, and we wish everybody watching who is celebrating a Happy New Year, and of course, Happy New Year to Phil, Virginia, to your family. And thank you again, and we hope to see you in person some point soon. And as a reminder, our museum is now open 5 days a week, so you can follow our website for more information. Thank you so much, Phil and Virginia. Have a wonderful.
Oh, it's our pleasure.